Hello, good evening. Welcome to your Scottish Parliament. My name is Emma Harper. I'm one of the MSPs from the South Scotland region. It's great to see so many Wheelkent faces here tonight. And I'm pleased to be sponsoring this event, which is Creative Placemaking Culture in Communities, with my colleague Colin Smith here, who is also an MSP for the South Scotland region. And when we start off these events, it's customary to thank other MSPs who have given us their time this evening, who are attending here. So I'm going to shout out to Maggie Chapman, Ariane Burgess, I see Claire Baker here, and I see Claire Adamson as well. I know there's loads of events happening in the Parliament pretty much every evening, and so I thank my MSP colleagues for coming along here tonight. I'm sure other colleagues may pop in and out, so you might see other folk as the reception progresses. We also invited Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson, MSP, who's the Culture Cabinet Secretary. Angus is unable to attend, but he sent the following message. He says, "I'm sorry to be missing tonight's event, but I'm very grateful to the Stove Network for the invite and to my colleagues Colin Smith and Emma Harper for their sponsorship. The Scottish Government believes everyone in Scotland should have access to culture. There are a myriad of talented creatives and inspiring organisations like the Stove Network who make this happen across the country, and the reception is a worthy celebration of that, and I know many of you are here tonight." Angus also says, "I hope it will forge new links and ideas to help build stronger, more cohesive communities through creative placemaking, and wish you all the very best for the night." So I thank Cabinet Secretary Angus for this message of support. And just since my election in this session and since 2016, I've worked closely with Matt and everybody at the Stove on a number of different initiatives. And I think it's fair to say that the Stove has carried out fantastic work to support creatives within Dumfries and the wider region to thrive, and it has undoubtedly brought cultural events to the town. I've attended many of these festivals, such as the Nith Raid, which celebrates the River Nith in Dumfries, and the Nith Raid has grown stronger every year since its inception. And then there's also the Wild Goose Festival. That's another event worth noting. Places and people underpin culture and communities across Scotland and generate a distinct sense of place, identity and confidence. Through engagement with the Stove and other cultural organisations, and from the Culture Committee's report on culture in communities, it is clear that there is a need for integrated, coordinated actions to deliver improvements for communities. We want Scotland to be a place where culture is valued, protected and nurtured. Culture is woven through everyday life and is shaped by society, and its transformative potential is experienced by everyone. Scotland's rich cultural heritage and creativity of today is inspired by people and place. It enlivens every community and is celebrated around the world. However, we do have challenges within the culture sector. It is important to acknowledge that the Scottish Government is operating in a challenging fiscal context. A combination of the impacts of Brexit, the aftermath of the pandemic, the energy crisis, they have all sent prices spiralling. And in light of this challenging context, the Scottish Government has been reviewing the actions that support its culture strategy. The Scottish Government will publish a refreshed action plan later this year, setting out what it will do to respond to those challenges. I would like to highlight some of the key points from the Culture Committee's evidence session in Dumfries and Galloway, which I attended. I'm not a committee member, but as an MSP I got to go to the meetings that took place in Dumfries. So there were members from the Stove Network, there, Svisanker, D&G Council, and Lift D&G. Lift is Lochside is families together, and it's good to see you here tonight. It's your smiley face here to see them. The Dumfries and Galloway Council provided evidence that to overcome barriers to cultural participation, it is important to support communities to grow the cultural activities they want to see rather than taking a top-down approach. Rural transport was flagged by all as a huge issue for people in the area and a barrier to cultural participation. Since the pandemic, there's been more awareness of the need for a hybrid approach, recognising the need for direct human connection, but also in keeping engaged those who might not be able to travel to events in person. So I welcome this reception and the ability to have these discussions this evening. So I am going to hand over to my colleague, Colin Smith, who's going to say a few words as well.
Thank you so much, Emma. And can I echo Emma's welcome to everyone and say what an absolute pleasure it is to co-host tonight's Stovies on Tour event, I think is right to say, here in the Scottish Parliament. I'm unashamedly going to be quite parochial in my words. I'm probably too old to say I've grown up with the Stove Network, but I think I've probably certainly grown older with it. And I had the privilege of being a local councillor in Dumfries, including the town centre, for a decade some time ago. So I was there at the birth of the Stove, having been involved in the transfer of the building on the High Street to the Stove as their HQ. And that's a story in itself for anyone who wants to hear about that. I then saw the Stove really come of age in the work it did on culture-led regeneration in the town centre, which culminated in the establishment of the Mid-Steeple Quarter, which is quite literally taken back our High Street. And I've really seen the way the Stove have, I suppose, flown the nest of the town centre, reaching out to communities right across Dumfries and Galloway, and a particular mention, of course, for Lochside, a community where I was brought up, making the case that, yes, supporting professional performance in culture is important, but so too is participation in culture, particularly for me in communities that are too often don't get those opportunities and are too often being left behind. And I have to say that there really is a growing recognition that something special is happening in Dumfries and Galloway with the Stove, with our creative sector working at the heart of our rural communities, making a real difference in places and for the people who live there. It was no coincidence that when this Parliament's Economy Committee, and I'm delighted that Claire Baker's here, who chairs, or did chair the Economy Committee, was actually visited the Mid-Steeple Quarter when we carried out that inquiry to find out about their work. And it's no coincidence that when the Culture Committee carried out their inquiry into place-based approach to culture, they also visited the Stove Network. And I'm delighted that Claire's here as a convener of that committee. And I can tell those from Dumfries that I took the committee to the hole in the wall that night to get a real taste of Dumfries culture. But ladies and gentlemen, the recognition of the Stove by this Parliament means it is really appropriate that we're having this event here in the Parliament to bring people together to talk about the issues and the work that's been done by the Stove, but actually so many of the groups, so many of the organisations, so many of the people here tonight. The Stove, in my view, really have been a leading light in the cultural renaissance that we've seen in Dumfries and Galloway, and no more so than in creative placemaking that has been at the core of the Stove since its birth more than a decade ago. So I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to put you in the very capable hands of Matt from the Stove to open up the discussion and give you the opportunity to have that debate and take that creative placemaking debate to the next level. So welcome to the Parliament and please enjoy your evening.
Hello. It was all a bit embarrassing, but thank you very much. We're not going to talk about Stove all evening, you'll be glad to hear. This is about all of you guys and everything that everybody is doing around the country and trying to sort of like maybe put a stick in the ground about bringing that together, about how we can take that further in the work that we do. Just before we dive into all, I should just say also about the plan for tonight is we're going to sort of do a panel discussion that's got three organisations that are going to give a short presentation about what they do, then a bit of Q&A, which is then going to open up to the room, and then we're going to stop that bit, well, depending if everybody wants to keep chatting or not, but then it'll be a sort of just a networking floating around, and there's drink and food outside. So that's what's planned for the evening. Before we dive into all of that, I would just like to give a special welcome to Claire Adamson, who's the convener of the SEAC committee, which includes culture and a whole load of other stuff that none of us can ever remember, but the culture is the important bit, right? Claire, would you just like to say a word of welcome? Or
Yes, Delighted to be here this evening, and as Emma said, we undertook some work on this as a committee and published a report in 2023 on culture and communities as challenges and opportunities in delivering a place-based approach. And I want to thank the Stove very much as not only as a shining example of place-based culture, but also for working with the committee in that report. I have to say, Colin, when you were in the hole in the wall, I was in St Magnus Cathedral in Orkney on the other half of the visits that we were doing as part of the St Magnus Festival. So a very different cultural experiences, certainly from the reports back from the committee members who were in Dumfries that night. So it's really important that we get out and speak to the people that are working in this area, to everyone in this room. It's your accounts of the challenges and your understanding of how important culture is in our communities that is so important. And the Stove Network also came to our committee launch, and at that event I had managed, totally abusing my position as convener, to get our local recovery group along, who had been working, playing music and doing some art. And they played a song that they'd written for themselves about being in recovery. And in the Q&A session at that point, one of the women actually said it saved her life. If she didn't have that music, that learning, that opportunity, she really didn't know how she would have got to a stage of recovery from her addiction issues. And that's how important what you do for communities is. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. Okay, so pose a question. What do you think of when you hear the word culture? What's the picture in your head? I place a bet that the picture in everybody's head right now is a little bit different. And I think that is one of the issues that we face, particularly when we're trying to build cross-sector partnerships as part of this much hoped for mainstreaming of culture, as part of the way Scotland works towards well-being economy and community wealth building. Today, we are here to talk about one specific part of that cultural spectrum and to make a case for a degree of independence for this area of practice. We're talking about culture that is created in and grows from the grassroots of communities. Now, today of all days, we should be looking very seriously at supporting this type of work. Creative activity at community level is extremely effective at reaching people who feel disenfranchised and making pathways to involvement in local decision making. As we watch the US and despair at another autocrat taking advantage of people's sense of distance from the decisions that affect them, serious investment in culture would be a significant means of rebuilding an inclusive democracy. Of course, none of this is new. Those of us in this room who work in this type of practice stand here on the shoulders of giants. Helen Crummie's Craig Miller Festival Society here in Edinburgh, the Newtown Artist Movement led by David Harding, which grew into the world-leading environmental art course in Glasgow, and also the Artist Placement Group, which positioned artists in factories and shipping companies to work alongside staff. In recent times, we've had the Culture Collective initiative inspired by Roosevelt's New Deal in 1930s America, which placed artists who were out of work because of COVID lockdowns into communities in need. And Culture Collective is one of the things that unites many of us in this room tonight. Culture in communities has always sat somewhat uncomfortably within what we think of as the culture portfolio. The British Arts Council came into being on the back of the role that culture played in boosting morale in the Second World War. That first Arts Council had two strands of funding, one for professionally created culture, as we now know it, and a second strand for encouraging people in communities to make their own culture, typically in the forms of choirs and amateur theatre at that time. Then in the early 50s, the economist John Maynard Keynes, as the minister responsible for culture at that time, made the announcement that the Arts Council would fund only the best, not the most, and the participation in culture strand was done away with, leaving us with the understanding of funded culture which we still largely have to this day. What we're arguing for here today is that in Scotland now, we have the opportunity, and I believe a necessity, for reasons of well-being, democracy and human rights, to make a profound change by reinstating a dedicated support structure for community culture in communities. We're incredibly honoured today to have with us a delegation from Ireland, which is led by the Chief Executive of the Arts Council of Ireland, Maureen Kennelly. The way art supports culture is very different to here, with strategic decisions made between different forms of practice. And as a country, they've invested strongly in culture as a key plank in the building of their society, including even a recent trial of universal basic income for artists. Maureen is one of the most passionate and eloquent advocates for culture that I've ever heard, and I'm thrilled to introduce her to you now. And following Maureen's address, we'll then have this short panel discussion with a chance for everybody to contribute. So, Maureen.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Is until an rud é a bheith an seo, gur míle maith agad as an gcuire a bheith an seo is over an a tábhachtach seo agus fáiltíim ribh an deis seo. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues from Callan Workhouse Union. Thanks so much to you, Matt, and to everybody here for arranging this meeting. I think it's fantastic that we can be here and discuss these matters. We've learned so much from Scotland over the years, not just in the area of participatory arts, but so much more. And it was great that Matt came to Creative Places in a town, Carlow, a couple of years back, and I know that that's where the engagement has begun. So it's fantastic to see those links growing. And as I talk about Carlow, we were just talking about it there right now, there's a fantastic centre called Visual, a really show-stopping art centre in a small town, Carlow. And our laureate for Irish fiction is the novelist Colm Tóibín. Hopefully many of you know him. And he spoke there, he gave the lecture there just last Sunday. And he spoke about a painter from his hometown of Enniscorthy, which is an even smaller town again, which in fact won the Tidy Towns this year. And this painter was a guy called Sam Walsh. And Sam Walsh had emigrated to Liverpool and became quite a well-known painter in Liverpool. And Colm said, we grew up in the same streets. It would have made a difference had there been a show of Sam Walsh's work somewhere in the town. It would have helped had I been able to see that you could come from here and transform yourself. Do work from whatever had caught your attention. Painting did not exist in a small town. It was done by others elsewhere. And it's just so notable that, you know, somebody like that, so well known, that those influences, the gaps that might have caused him not to make work. When I think about this, I often think too about the deceased poet Derek Mahon, who's one of our best known poets, and he has this amazing line in one of his best known poems, places where a thought might grow. And that's, to me, is very much what creative placemaking is doing. How are we going to grow those fantastic thoughts and create those communities and create those synergies and connections? And that's what we're trying to do in the Arts Council. And our current mantra of one of our campaigns is more places, more spaces, more people. At that conference where Matt met Rosie and many others, we launched our spatial policy. And we set out our intention as the Arts Council's vision is for a country where everyone has the opportunity to create, engage with, participate in and enjoy the arts, regardless of who they are or where they live and work. And that's very much underpinned as well by our equality, diversity and inclusion policy. So a number of policies have come together to really support the growth of what we used to call community arts, which we've been supporting since the 1980s, and what we're now calling participatory arts. And as part of that policy, we support Rosie and Callan Workhouse Union. We support about 20 organisations. And I'm happy to say that with increased investment from the government, our support for arts participation was under 2 million in 2019, and it's now 5 million. So there has been a lot of investment from the government during this most recent government, which is about to be dissolved, as you probably all know. So hopefully we'll get a similarly sympathetic government. So the investment into the Arts Council has grown from a figure of 75 million in the summer of 2019 to its current level. For next year, we'll have 140 million. So again, that's a seismic growth. Now, we need more, but it's fantastic that it has grown so strongly in recent years. And Matt mentioned as well the pilot basic income for artists, which is again seen as quite a groundbreaking scheme whereby 2,000 artists from all art forms were chosen by a randomised lottery and are on this basic income of €325 per week for a 3-year pilot scheme or a 3-year pilot programme. And hopefully, again, that's something that the next government will extend, because the results of that have been phenomenal. We do believe and we know that the arts have the power to change a community's idea about itself. One of the programmes that we've been running as part of this increased investment is called Creative Places, and we have very much borrowed from yourselves here in creating that programme. And it started as a pilot programme back in 2019, and now we have 19 different towns who are on that programme. And I guess the results from that have been very compelling indeed. People have talked about the morale of their town changing, which is quite a powerful thing to think about. To think that people think about their town in that way and can actually measure it is really fantastic. And of course, it's places in Ireland that haven't benefited from sustained arts investment in the past. What we want to do is build those local arts programmes which will benefit those local communities. And I guess in looking at the results, we're looking for the community voice all the time. What is the community telling us about the effects that these programmes? And I like to think of it in terms of a connective tissue of all these places working together that creates a civic force field of activity, and that it's so powerful, it's just making the argument all by itself, that those arguments are completely compelling. So just to touch very briefly on it, the first town was Tuam, which is in East Galway. It's a town that's characterised by high levels of the traveller community living there, who'd be very disengaged from the local art scene. And we very much, the programme has worked to very much engage with them and to bring forth their creativity, and has had great outcomes in terms of them being involved in more established things like Galway Film Plan, other established arts events. Darndale is another community that's one of those 19 places. It's a very, very deprived area of Dublin. Again, quite a high population of the traveller community living there. And they have created their own festival, which was a seismic event for them to actually bring to say, this is our community, this is how proud we are of this community. And just showing it at its very best. And we're hoping to sustain it. We certainly do not want a cliff edge whereby we're investing in these communities and then they're falling off a cliff edge. So, and the Irish language as well is something very important to us. The Irish language, obviously, the proportion of people in Ireland who speak it is quite low, but it's growing. There's a real resurgence in it. So very looking at those communities as well who felt marginalised from the centre. Local authorities are critical partners. Thrilled that Martin is here from the Leader Company. We have the Arts Council has a 40-year relationship with local authorities, which we'll be celebrating next year. So the work that we do with those partners is absolutely key to the success. In terms of Creative Places alone, since 2019, we've invested 5 million in that programme so far. And as I say, we're evaluating it very closely. What we're seeing is that it is creating huge confidence in those communities and connecting people and connecting artists. And I guess it's artists who are coming forward and saying, I didn't know I could work in my own town. And that's really fantastic. And of course, we have the phenomenon too, whereby post-COVID, that many artists are moving outside the urban population. So it's brilliant. And I mean, I get so excited every time I go to Callan. It's just the most extraordinary place. Because there was an amazing theatre production called The Big Chapel, which was an adaptation of a Booker shortlisted novel by a deceased writer, Tom Kilroy, which was presented there in 2018 and 2019. To see the whole town emptying itself out to put this on was just absolutely stunning. So more to follow and more to come, and we're absolutely thrilled to obviously support Callan Workhouse Union. Something I guess that Rosie and I just in talking about today talked about was the fact that architecture is a recognised art form. I know you're going to touch on it as well, Rosie. And we have been supporting that since the very start of the Arts Council. It's interesting to hear you chat about the English Arts Council. So we were formed after and kind of following that model. And we celebrated 70 years in existence, and architecture was one of the 5 initial art forms. What you're seeing now in terms of architecture is there is a younger cohort of architects coming through who desperately want to work with artists in socially engaged practice. And I think that's extremely exciting. And then that there are so many other things like Town Centre First, the nighttime economy. The public realm is now something that we all think about and that we take seriously, and we think about how people are connected to their public realm. So, you know, it's a really exciting time. I used to work with Poetry Ireland, so I'm never done quoting poems. So there's one that I like very much, an American poet, Nobel laureate Louise Glick. She said, "We look at the world first in childhood, the rest is memory." So that sense of connection, your memory to your local place. And we're always carrying that sense of our place with us. It's such a powerful thing. And there's a great architect who I know Rosie has and others have worked with. She has written a fantastic book about towns. Her name is Valerie Mulvin. So I'm going to finish with a fantastic line from Valerie. She said, "The town in the final analysis is nothing more or less than a backdrop to the wild opportunism of life," which I think says it all. So, thank you.
Okay, so on to the panel. So we're aiming here to outline a way that culture is working intentionally with places and people. In other words, how creativity and culture can work collaboratively with communities and support cross-sector working and address civic, economic and development needs within local communities. Just put this sort of jargony, technical way of saying what you've been saying, so apologies for that. We've got 3 different organisations who are working with these common aims, but they're all using different methodologies and or terms of reference for their work. So we'll hear a short introduction to their work, and then we'll begin a collective discussion about potential futures for this type of work and open that discussion to the room. So we're going to start. I'm not going to introduce people because I'm sure they're going to introduce themselves in their chat. So we're going to start with Art27 Scotland and Helen True.
Oh. Do you know, I've got the worst position after coming after you. How am I going to do that? Hello, and thank you so much, Matt and Kat at the Stove, for this generous invitation, and a huge welcome to my countrywomen, Rosie and Maureen. We are delighted to be part of this timely and I think very urgent conversation around creative placemaking. It's wonderful to look at this shared process from different angles, and we bring a very specific urban perspective in contrast to the rural. Oh, I haven't got my speaker on, you're right. That was a boring bit. Did you all hear that anyway? Yeah, that's all right, that's okay. Actor training, you know. So R27 is run by myself and Robert Ray, and it takes its mission from Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community and to enjoy the arts. As long-standing practitioners in the culture sector, rooted in art form practice that intersects with the qualities, place and policy initiatives, we see a gap between the aspiration for cultural life and cultural inequality growing ever wider. The intention of the Scottish Government to incorporate economic, social and cultural rights through the new Scottish Human Rights Bill was a potential catalysing moment of change for us, and our hearts remain strong even with the bill's delay. And whether the bill passes or not, cultural rights are already our obligation as a nation. We operate across practice, policy and through a wide range of methodologies, creative tools and partnerships appropriate to the outcomes intended. And so we see cultural rights as a fundamental tool and a contribution to creative placemaking, the necessity of which is recognised by the G8, by global cities across the world to combat populist politics and have redesigned their cultural policies around rights for this reason. A brief example of one of our projects was in the south side of Edinburgh. Due to the presence of the Central Mosque and the university's international recruitment, our neighbourhood is a growing global community living locally, and also living locally, but also living through their diaspora and the dispersal of their families. And it's building a service infrastructure around itself. Now, much of rights-based practice begins with bridging the inequalities based on race, religion, gender, age, cultural identity and class, and it begins with those furthest from the right. So our aim was to explore barriers to cultural participation by raising alternative perspectives and challenging privileged hierarchies through artistic collaborations often based on intangible cultural heritage and themes of migration. We delivered a series of socially engaged artist residencies through first languages, Arabic, Cantonese, Mandarin, Polish, Farsi and English. We brought many of those cultural communities together in our underused and unwelcoming community centre, and we asked them, what does the right to your cultural life look like? And they said, well, we need a cultural space to be ourselves in our own community, but we also want to meet others in shared activities. A cultural space is also a social space. They're not separate. We need to feel safe. Anti-racist messaging has to be clear. And please, no alcohol. We need less bureaucracy. So we designed an 18-month residency as a culture collective project around local cultural strategy and city plans and the outcomes that participants wanted. We brought literally hundreds of new users to the space, which started to look and feel inside and out like an actual neighbourhood centre. It culminated in an amazing festival of migration where we brought commissioned, socially engaged work and grassroots cultures together and held a 3-day celebration in our neighbourhood and facilitated a World Cafe Cultural Rights Assembly to discuss how the right to a cultural life could best be served in our neighbourhood. So what did we learn? The UN have a very long definition of what cultural rights are, and that includes ways of life, art, traditions, food, environment, housing, health, education, basically everything that brings meaning and dignity to an individual person. The duty of national and local government is to create the conditions for culture to thrive, and that includes situating decision-making closer to the communities most affected or in need, and that looks different in every place. Yet those pathways to local cultural participation are not accessible. It's clear the power lies with the same people with access to culture, to cultural and social capital, and time to volunteer. The communities knew what decisions needed to be taken for that community space to become sustainable and relevant, but they were actively stopped from becoming decision takers as the voluntary committee suspended memberships during our residency when they saw change happening. They effectively denied the many migrant communities a voice. The South Side is also home to significant cultural, community and education organisations, and we now have a brilliant set of partners in the Queen's Hall and the Festival Studio Theatre, the Charterist Centre and Edinburgh University. We're all working together to deliver our next festival during Refugee Week 2025. Creative placemaking also enables, but it requires us to work across sectors to support the local social cohesion and the local agency that we need to have. We can't do it alone, and the brokering of those relationships is key to the success. So in conclusion, I want to point to an astonishing statistic that I discovered, which was by 2050, 2/3 of the world's population will be living in cities. Creative placemaking for us in our city context is about social cohesion and local agency, and today's news makes that all the more urgent. Cultural expression is the glue that will hold us together, but we need cultural rights to ensure the accountability is in place, and that is currently missing. So I'm going to finish with the rest of the quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, which I think she sums up beautifully what cultural rights are. Where, after all, do human rights begin? In small spaces close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighbourhood they live in, the school, the college they attend, the factory, farm or office where they work. Such are the places where every person seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. And unless these rights have meaning there, then they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted citizen action, and also people who are not citizens, but residents and neighbours, unless there is action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Right, we're now moving on to Rosie Lynch, who's the Director of Workhouse Union in Callan.
Great. Thank you so much to the Stove for this welcome and invitation, and it was really wonderful walking into your parliament today and just also feeling how welcoming the architecture of this place is. So just wonderful to be joining with so many new faces, and I'm very eager to hear what everyone in this room is up to, because I think there's a real wealth of experience. So thanks so much. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we're coming from, where Workhouse Union are coming from, and Maureen spoke about our town, Callan. And it's a place that for the last 14 years we've been working in and out of this town in the southeast of Ireland. And the town, like many places that you work, have has a particular set of circumstances that lead to things happening. And Callan has very strong heritage, of very strong roots in community development and inclusion. Wonderfully, I suppose, kind of kept in time architectural space, a very real generosity in how we can bring our town into the future, and a very strong need for town revitalisation. And these things, that kind of strong community development and heritage, has led to a considerable flourishing of artistic activity and practice over the past 25 years. In the Callan art scene, we're kind of newbies. We're the new kids on the block, and we were very much, this support structure embedded in the town has in turn supported Workhouse Union and other artists to accompany community-led town centre renewal and various placemaking and place-specific projects over many years. And so we grew out of this rich ecology of town renewal projects. And I think, very much as a young person growing up in Callan, I had that privilege of what Colm Tobin didn't have, of the arts really kind of being able to influence my future. On a simple level, our work at Workhouse Union supports people in local decision making. So it's really nice to follow what Helen has been speaking about. And we spend a lot of time thinking about the barriers of people's involvement in local decision making and taking. I think we often don't think of decision taking. And people's agency to really be active, both in cultural participation, but also wider decisions around the places and spaces that they live in. Our approach, we really try to root our approach in care and collaboration. It's obviously an ongoing process. It's never finished. And our work centres around the role of creativity, the arts and imagination in bringing people together around complex issues and challenges. Our work often develops at a neighbourhood scale. I think everybody has touched on this word neighbourhood today. Our focus often is quite simply, what's a neighbourhood? What's a supportive neighbourhood? And a lot of our neighbourhood thinking has been shaped by quite an important project for us called Nimble Spaces, which initially set out as a community-led housing project. We've obviously, feel big kinship to things that have been happening in Dumfries around the Mid-Steeple Quarter and following your journey there. So the Nimble Spaces project initially was developed through an arts-led process that was funded by the Arts Council. And we explored for many years, probably 3 to 5 years was this arts-led process, exploring concepts of home, care, disability, interdependence, mutual aid and support. And despite this arts-led participatory planning process leading to actual planning permission for 25 new homes and informing discourse around community-led housing in Ireland, after 12 years, we're sort of back at the beginning. And we're on another steep learning process to support the development of a community land trust that will steward the 2 heritage sites where these homes will hopefully one day be built in our town. And we're beginning another cycle of exploration around care, housing and our ecological crisis. Our work crosses over community development and the arts, and over the past 14 years our work has been supported by the Arts Council through the participatory art strand that Maureen has spoken about, and locally funded by Kilkenny Leader Partnership. And I'm delighted that we're joined here this evening by Maureen Kennelly, Director of the Arts Council of Ireland, and Martin Rafter, Assistant CEO of Kilkenny Leader Partnership, who administer EU rural development funding, and in which Martin coordinates the social inclusion programme. So again, I think speaking to a lot of the work that Helen and Art 27 do. I'm also joined by my colleague Nortu van Dursen from Workhouse Union, and Nortu was a co-founder of KCAT Art Centre, which is a radical art centre built around inclusion, which was the mothership for the creative resurgence in Callan. So very interestingly, the art scene in Callan is led by people with a disability, which has really had profound effects on everyone who's, I think, visited and engaged with the art scene in Callan. And Davy Phillip, who's the chair of our board and a considerable innovator in his own right in terms of neighbourhood resilience and sustainability. So out of our Callan learning, we now work regionally and nationally. So similar to Stove, we've sort of spread our wings a little bit out of our hometown. And some of this wider focus for our work developed through town ecologies, which is a much smaller scale version of the ambition of the What We Do Now network, which the Stove have been developing with many, many partners over the last few years. And so the town ecologies process has been looking county-wide, and then we've been kind of expanding that a bit more regionally. So informed by the patchwork of informal creative placemaking projects in Callan, Town Ecologies developed out of ongoing work with Kilkenny Leader Partnership and our local authority, with an explicit focus of supporting communities outside of formal planning processes to experiment, imagine creatively together, and prepare for future funding and planning opportunities. And in a sense, our work sometimes can be a little bit at odds with other socially engaged practice, in that we have very strong intention to, I suppose, work with, that the work is really leading to some kind of tangible planning outcomes. And it's kind of also very important that all the projects that we get involved with are initiated, that we're invited in. So that invitation is always very important. And we kind of very much try to hold true to this idea of community-led rather than artist-led. So we're very much bringing art and creativity into kind of a community-led process, but that's the kind of number one focus or pillar. And this community-led approach is a core principle that we really strive to uphold. And with each project, program, activity, we learn more and are challenged by our blind spots, which I'm sure many of you in the room can, understand. So in the earlier days of our place-based experimentation and creative journeys in Callan, this happened within a very particular space for new thinking that rose out of the post-financial crash crisis. And I think similar to Stove starting kind of around 2010. There seemed to be a kind of a space for kind of new thinking in place-based approaches. So we use terms like participatory planning, and I'm sure lots of conversations we had with Martin, the local authority, we were throwing around all these new words, and also collaborative art and architecture. So, but it's really only in the last few years, and thanks to meeting Matt at that Places Matter conference in Carlow, that the language and thinking of this way of working has become more concrete. So our ongoing exchange of the Stove has helped shape our language and approach in naming this practice, creative placemaking. I've also heard Matt mention a Scottish approach to creative placemaking and an Irish approach. And I think what might define the Irish creative placemaking approach comes from the fact, as Maureen said, that architecture is a recognised art form in the Irish Arts Council. So it is an art form like dance, like opera, like theatre. And over the last, I'd say 10 to 15 years, there has been a lot of focus on that collaborative art and architecture growing together alongside each other. And so both kind of quite interchangeable, and looking really at the built environment as being a place to invest artistically, but also to, I suppose, work with partners like local authority and people who are the stewards of place in a very respectful and open way. And so in Ireland, we actually have two clear organisations that have a national remit to support the sector. Create, which is our national development agency for collaborative arts in social and community contexts. So that's kind of would really lead the participatory arts sector in Ireland. And then the Irish Architecture Foundation, also funded by the Arts Council, have a Reimagine programme, which is very much about funding placemaking and kind of socially engaged architecture. And then more informally, we've been working with many colleagues across kind of community development, the arts, architecture. We could go on and on, I suppose, how wide that is, through a loose community of practice, maybe which it could be called, very much centred around an ongoing project called Making Neighbourhoods. And we're really eager, I suppose, I feel like I'm going to be bringing back a lot of knowledge from today's evening to that kind of community of practice in Ireland that have been looking very strongly to Scotland, because maybe some of you don't know that Ireland, our current programme for government that's just about to end, has looked at Scotland and brought over all of your town centre first policies. So we have literally been copying and pasting from Scotland to Ireland. So thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. I think, yeah, for those in policy positions, I think that your mention of the 12 years it had taken for that community-led process, and you were still recycling that and hadn't turned into a thing, I think that really lays down a challenge in the way that we think about infrastructure and capital developments. Often we start with kind of capital developments that kind of like land in a place, and I don't know about you, Rosie, but we then spend time kind of trying to repair those and fix them and bring the community into them. And we really need to find a way of backing people to start their own process and then have a pathway to turning that into a solid thing at the end. Catherine Wheeler from The Stove is our third example.
Thank you. Goodness, it's quite a space to be talking in. And really hot. So, yeah, it's just been great to hear the examples that people have shared. And I just want to say I'm aware of so many people in the room who are doing such brilliant work that I'm going to keep this sort of brief, because there's been a lot of mention of the Stove. But just in case there's anybody who really doesn't know who we are, we talk about ourselves as an arts and community organisation in the High Street. We're really focused on using arts engagement as a way of, and creativity as a way for people to come together in spaces and together around actions and ideas to ways of taking those actions forward for the benefit of their community. As already alluded to, we're originally focused on the High Street and regeneration, but now we work regionally to support artists and community organisations to work in this way together, with the intent of long-term thinking and change. And one of the main vehicles for that way of working is through the What We Do Now network, which we piloted through the Culture Collective programme. So this is an approach to community building, I suppose, is one of the ways that I like to talk about it. Also creative placemaking. It not only grows relationships with all who have a stake in a place, a local community, regional, national partners, to enact long-term visions, but really importantly, it also creates work opportunities and a greater diversity of work opportunities. And I can say that from a really my own personal experience in the spaces that creative freelancers can step into. And importantly, it builds on and supports the development of local expertise, knowledge, and capacity to take projects and programs forward for themselves. So it really is the community groups and organisations that are working with artists to have these ideas, but then they are taking that work forward. And they're valuing the work and the creative work that they're already doing. And as an example of that, I wanted to shine again a light on the work of Lift. Angie loves me this evening, and you can talk to her later on. But the reason I do is that, Lift was founded by Angie, and I love the way I hear you talk about it. They started to do things that really brought people together to celebrate and find pride in the place that they live, really as a rebuff to the label that they've been given as one of Scotland's most deprived communities. And I hear you said, we're not deprived in so many ways. We've got so much. And the Stove have been working with Lift, and we've got a wonderful relationship in various ways for several years. And they were one of our founding members of the What We Do Now network, and we're working with them to this day. And through What We Do Now, and with connecting with the work that they were already doing, they worked with artists Rosie, Alice, and Andy, and they initiated a program of engagement with local residents to think more creatively about what they would like to see in their community. And they also formed a long-term working relationship. So Angie's working now with Rosie and Alice, and will hopefully continue to work, certainly for the next 12 months. A big part of this was looking at the green spaces, the disused spaces, the spaces around them, and how these could be reclaimed for local people. And the What We Do Now team, I think, were able to bring extra capacity and experience, I suppose, to help them negotiate the gifting and siting of a porta cabin from Wheatley South for their residents, and support them in developing, we're actually getting that signed off, which is a story in itself, but support them in developing and resourcing a programme of creative activities. So they now have Creative Scotland funding for this programme of activity, and the Stove was able to sort of lend some of our policies and our work, and Lift are holding that grant award, but we were able to lend them some of the work that we've done to be able to give Creative Scotland the confidence that they were working in this way. Angie's just done amazing work, though, negotiating a whole load more porta cabins with Wheatley, and is going to be taking over that space with a long-term ambition, I think, to evidence, the need for a bespoke cultural space in Lochside that Lift could run and manage for their community, rather than always feeling like they have to go to cultural activity that's something that happens somewhere else, but actually something that they do for themselves. So I think that that's an example just to keep watching and learning from. And some of the key learnings that we've taken from that work is that it is a challenging way of working, but it's actually through working through these challenges together and finding the principles and values of working through those challenges creatively that help local partnerships to form and make this amazing work. It fosters lasting and equitable impact where the power and the ownership really sits with local people. It struggles for support because it sits between art practice and community learning and development. For example, I know of a project that was recently told by a wind farm that they wouldn't have support for their community mural because the wind farm doesn't fund art projects. And they needed to evidence that the community wanted this, even though there was this engagement and it was with the local school. And so there's a real need here to look at community benefit and the funds that are out there. There's an opportunity, or this approach is an opportunity, as I'd already said, as a different way for artists to work and for groups to work with artists as part of a wider movement in community-led work. And finally, I think it's important to say that I think this still gives space for artists to be disruptive and innovative, but it also recognises the right of communities to get support for their own homegrown culture, which really does require a different structure of support and measurement of impact. That's me. Oh, I didn't even do the picture because I was in charge of the slides.
Thank you, Kat, and thank you, everybody. Thank you to our panel. From long and bitter experience, you don't keep the culture sector quiet. It's over to you guys. Anybody is open to questions, I think. So has anybody got anything
And we
Hello, and we have our assistant Martin with the sparkly microphone. So, and if you, when you speak, if you could maybe introduce yourself as well, that would be great. Thank you. Martin, over there.
Thank you. I really need this microphone after those election results today. It's a good microphone. My name's Simone Stewart. I work for Govan Hill Bars Community Trust in Glasgow. I sort of work with arts and heritage there. We have lots of different projects. We have a pantry as part of that feeds sort of 500 families a week and things. And I've been doing quite a lot of thinking and work in this space for a little while, and I think it's really interesting that this term about arts as a sort of human right comes up, and it comes up quite often, because I'm not trying to park that idea in any way, shape or form, but I would like to make a polite provocation to that idea, which is that I spend a lot of time thinking about the world we live in, and then thinking about how we resource that world from elsewhere, from like a ghost world that we're really not connected to in our day-to-day lives. And the more art projects I work with artists and we co-create through our communities together, the more I move away from the term of arts as a right, where we come up with quite similar answers about sort of getting access to food systems or getting access to things. If I start thinking about arts as a fundamental human need, thinking of arts as a form of sustenance, as creativity, as a way that we live and breathe as an animal, as fundamental as shelter. And I feel quite strongly about this because arts is being cut so much in Scotland at the moment. I start getting different questions coming back to me from audiences. They start thinking about how do we create arts that help us feed ourselves. And I just want to put that in the room today, because I think there's a way to think about arts as a right, but also to think about arts as a need to help bridge that gap between the world we live in and the world we live from. So yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Simone. Okay, that's. Do you want to come back on that, or Robert from R27 as well?
There's everyone. Sorry. Yeah, I'm Robert. I'm from Art27, but I'm the artist in residence based there. So I often wonder how I find myself in these forums talking about culture and policy. But I think in terms of responding to what you're saying, I think we talk about culture, not about art. And I think that what culture is so much broader than that. You know, so culture has an impact on all our lives. You know, it's kind of what defines us as human beings, culture. And that includes food, it includes housing, it includes education, and I think that's what we're talking about, not just art, but when we're talking about the participatory processes that we're talking about is access to culture. And establishing it as a human right, as one of almost the cement around all the human rights, really, I think is what we're looking for, and why we got drawn in to the human rights movement was accountability that is within that jurisdiction, within those judicial processes that say if a community is denied access to its culture or denied those spaces, what can they do about it? At the moment, they're kind of dependent upon the goodwill of local authorities or the goodwill of artists who bring it into their projects. But what if that's not available to them? Where do they go to as citizens and as citizens of Scotland? So that was what was exciting, I think, to all of us within the human rights movement. And that's why we took upon, through ISESCA, which was the incorporation of the Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, of emphasising that cultural aspect of it. So I think art is very important, but we prefer to use that broader notion of culture as a human right rather than art being a human right. So I think it's
Thanks, Robert. And don't feel like everybody's going to sort of address all things to the panel. If people want, if anybody else wants to fire in on that in the room, please go for it. There's a hand over there.
Hi, so I'm Nancy. I work with Arts, Culture, Health and Wellbeing Scotland, which is a network that basically is looking at the intersect between the arts and culture and health and wellbeing. We're doing a lot of work right now about the visibility of how culture is understood in health frameworks. And so the wellbeing place, the place tool, there's various structures that we're kind of having conversations right now, just looking around how on the top level, some structural changes need to happen to create pathways, because at the moment, and I'm maybe speaking specifically more about this area of work, rather, although I would argue all culture has a benefit to health and well-being, but in this context, it's about the fact that there's an amazing array of work happening all over Scotland, which is vibrant, is creative, but it's invisible, while all the different pathways to how people manage to find funding or exist, or how they operate so differently in so many different places, it's very difficult to actually see the evidence of community-based practice and be able to actually look at the structural sort of processes on a national level. But the structures need to change so we can actually find pathways. We need to evidence the impacts in a different way. So this isn't about necessarily constantly looking for more money. It's about actually valuing the impacts the work has and where it is actually saving or can save money in other areas, which at the moment is not connected to in a way that is transparent. So I suppose that would be I was so excited about coming tonight. I think I've heard Stove speak before, and to see, so there's so many examples across Scotland where there are brilliant practice of people coming together and working on a localised level and bringing together different sectors, different organisations, social care and health, working with, Public Health Scotland and the NHS and artists, but it's still something where it's derivative of the different regions, and it can't be something where we can replicate or legislate for that kind of practice to just be rolled out, because it comes from a community base. But we do need to still, I think, do some work around how visible it is within structures. I think I may be wrong, but I think on the wellbeing place tool, culture appears in terms of identity, and it's not referenced to any other area that culture impacts. In the place tool, culture is inferred, but it's not actually part of the question set or anywhere in the place model at all right now. So these are the kind of areas where it needs visibility on that level to start to create pathways that can cascade down to actually changing structures that free up the voice to be heard on a community level. That's all.
During that time.
Thank you, Nancy. There's so much in there, but particularly about the holding on to that localized structured part, but then the impact becomes invisible. I understand, and when we're talking about how a kind of support for this sector might come, I wonder whether devolve to regional levels is one of the essentials actually of that in a national body probably would make sense. But could I just come back on the, when you talk about that impact and the impact being invisible, have you got any insights about how that impact could be more visible?
Yeah.
We'll get it back to you next
time.
So
I think part of this is there is huge amounts of evidence, and yet we keep hitting the barrier of we need evidence to demonstrate this. It's not going to be evidenced on a local level by an artist working with a group that is able to evidence that in that group their impact is for the next 10 years less health, doctors. That's all evidenced on a much broader level. But I think at the moment it's trying to get over that barrier. The constant request for more evidence is absolutely there and obvious.
Okay.
And actually getting to the point where we just take for granted cultural engagement has a positive impact, and we start working out how we can create a better structure for it. That would be I think I've recently been involved with some conversations and it's like we can agree that physical activity is good for your health as a principle, and we get on with how we can encourage and how people engage and what can we do. We need the same thing for cultural engagement. We just need to get beyond the fact that it's being evidenced. It is.
Sorry, is anybody up here wanting to add to that?
I might just say one thing. I think you spoke briefly about how, I mean, one of the things we're working on is how do we influence or support, or more correctly, support people to shape the place they live in, you know, to enable people to be proud of where they're from. And I suppose one of the challenges we have, while an organisation as, you know, significant as yours is supporting that type of methodology of doing that work, the constraints that are put upon how the decisions are made by perhaps organisations like my own, a non-governmental body that has responsibility for delivery of programmes and funding projects, but also local authorities, our procurement guidelines, the decisions that are made at departmental level are completely alien to that approach, you know. And then, but what it's done, it's created this opportunity for large consulting companies to come in what is becoming an increasingly complex series of planning processes that extend from the National Development Plan right down to your village, your non-statutory village plan. And they're very lucrative contracts. They are very standardized pieces of work that are often confused between places. So there's a level of that kind of upward movement of influence that needs to happen in terms of how this methodology works, but also we can see in some cases with some local authorities who have been buyers of the offering of the larger actors in these spaces who are beginning to see the differences in quality. And when those moments arrive, we've pounced on them, you know, because we can see the difference. And it's been really good, particularly with our local authority, with Kenny, seeing an appreciation grow for the types of methodologies that Workhouse Union are pushing on with the support of yourselves as an appreciator. But it's interesting the disconnect that can happen at that level, at a national level. I think that would be something that might relate to your point there.
Thank you, Martin. I'm going to bring in Simon, who's been waiting patiently, I think.
Can you hear me? Sorry, Simon Sharkey. I run an organisation called The Necessary Space. I was going to say what Nancy was saying about the evidence being there, but also the language, the knowledge, the value that we place on the language and the words that we're using in terms of arts and artistry and culture and community and all of that. If that evidence is there and we know it is, why is it not making its way through to locally, nationally and internationally into policy making? I can see pockets that it is. My thought is that it's because people think the arts and culture and creative industries are fluffy. Yeah. And we really need to be able to stop that now. We know it's not. People who see its impact locally and nationally, they know it's not. And we shouldn't shy away from using the language like arts, and most of all, artistry, because they're different. I think that people think it's fluffy because they think of it as the nouns of art, the products, the outputs, and it's nice, but it's not. It's more than that. I think more of the verbs of art and what it is that we actually do and how we actually go about it, because the people who do it are experts, extraordinary experts. And we should be investing in all of that. And I'm going to pick up on what you were suggesting there, Matt, about that's why we need to separate it out. There's a workforce across Scotland and across the world, actually, who are experts in this field of artistry. And I'm interested in the models that are evolving in Ireland, where the processes of artistry and the verbs of artistry are coming to obviously being practiced, like collaboration and co-creation and empathy and community. We know how that works with artistry and culture. And I wanted to plant that here because it's the Scottish Parliament, that we should stop thinking of the arts as fluffy and start really clearly saying we know they're not, and they're an essential part, not just a right, they're an essential part of who we are and what we can become.
Martin, look at that. Stick a hand up. Thank you. Excuse your.
Where I use this.
Oh, okay.
I've got one here in front of
Sorry.
me. I am Burgess MSP for the Highlands Islands region. I represent a rural region, roots in the Creative Festival Society, though, so it's really fantastic to be in this row of amazing cultural placemakers. So there's a few things so I also convene the local government housing and planning committee, and Claire's gone. She's got the cultural side, but I've got the housing and planning, and I think there's some incredible opportunities here in Scotland. It is so great to hear the upswell of people grabbing that opportunity with local place plans and really getting the arts and that engagement in through that. And I think my committee should be called the Local Government Placemaking and Planning Committee, because we have to stop building these bedroom communities going forward. We've got this national planning framework that says we need 20-minute neighbourhoods, local, sustainable living. And there's an incredible opportunity there for what we're building in terms of new. How do we make that place? Because the built environment is an important part of how community happens. And I think many of you know that. But it also, we have our existing communities. And how do we start to turn those into ecological communities? And that's what you're doing. You're transforming them through culture into communities where people feel connected to each other, but also connected to the place, and to me, most importantly, connected to nature. And how are we going to look forward into a future where we are drawing from nature, responding to the climate, and we're using the arts to do that. So I do think there are opportunities in Scotland. And one of the things I have brought, so I'm my party, Green Party spokesperson for communities as well, that I have brought to the minister, who used to have communities in his name, but he doesn't anymore, Tom Arthur, is the need for a what I call soft infrastructure. I don't know, you've all probably got a better term, but I do, just as we think that we need roads and bridges and housing and all that stuff, we absolutely need what you were doing, because that's the networking, connecting, neural pathway, mycelial thing that actually we have to recognize is critical and crucial. So somebody asked, how do we get that to kind of come through the policy? So there's people like my colleagues here who've hosted this event tonight, myself, who have that interest. But also I think what needs to happen is you need to get it into the manifestos of every single party in Scotland for the next Holyrood election, so that we're all standing up and saying we need that mycelial network of the arts, and see that that is fundamental to the transformation that needs to happen in Scotland for the national planning framework, for climate, for nature, for housing, for placemaking, for so many things, for mental health, for well-being, all the things that have been mentioned tonight. So that needs to get into party manifestos so that all of us, 129 of us in that chamber upstairs, are saying this is something that's really important. And then we hold whoever is going to be the government to account in 2026 going forward. That needs to show up in, you mentioned programs for government. It needs to show up in programs for government and be seen as a very important piece. So there's a lot in there, but I just think this is an absolutely fantastic event. I'm so glad, as someone else said, that this is happening tonight in the Scottish Parliament.
hopefully we can keep that connection going if we've now got, we're all working together on it, right? So we've got a common project. And I think, you're talking about that national level. I think there's also that local level that I think you were referring to, Martin. And if you can imagine that, that mycelial infrastructure that you're talking about actually being resourced by some of those consultancy contracts that you're talking about, like we should be giving those to artists to be working together. Another hand. Johnny.
Sure.
Press the red button.
Thanks, Matt. I think, first off, absolutely right. I think the artist has a different status in Ireland and a different role in Ireland, and real sort of veneration for what they do, whether in writing or music or. And I think also, if you're thinking about this sort of culture, I always think that sort of community arts in Ireland comes from a very different place. I think it sort of draws on European, sort of more carnivalesque traditions with animation and street theatre and live music and small scale festivals. And I think that's all rooted in those deep rooted in a sort of Catholicism culture. Whereas I think very much what we have here in Britain is really quite an Anglo version of culture, and our view of the artist is a very Anglo view. I think it's more based on sort of class, and I think this kind of transpires because we end up sort of wanting to deliver culture all the time in Britain. And I think in Ireland, they want to foster culture more and grow culture. And I go back to your opening sentence about the grassroots. Whereas here, we're obsessed with how we can try and deliver culture and end up in sort of blind alleys of trying to be missionaries in communities that aren't our own saviours. The good news is that I think the Irish version is, it's a lot easier if you just forget to be a saviour, if you just be creative. It's a lot easier, it's a lot more fun. And the art in the end is a lot better and there's a lot more soul. I think that fosters community because that's what the art is about, is fostering communication and conversation. And I think then that through community that fosters democracy, which is what we're sitting in and living through and what we need to safeguard. To go back just to the version, I always say that in terms of the Highlands, there's a version of delivering culture, which is Systema, this choir thing, which is very much about big money, trying to save the people of Ratlock. And meanwhile, for the last 30 years, there's diffusion across the Highlands and Islands, small, homegrown, grassroots organisations, and they have fostered something really quite incredible in terms of safeguarding culture and passing it on through generations. So I think if we can go back to trying to think about the artist and think about how the artist works within their own communities and how it works through other communities.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a comment from Angie, and then one more, space for one more, because I want to, there's also stuff that we need to eat, drink outside, and we're going to get kicked out at some point, I'm sure. So
there's lots of wine and
there's
food.
I don't know if lock-ins are allowed. Guessing probably
Maybe.
not. Yeah, okay.
Try our best.
So, Angie.
Right, so first of all, I'm absolutely nervous to be here. I'm actually shaking and my heart's going a million, so bear with me, and if a day starts speaking too fast, just stick your hand and tell me to slow down, calm down. So as I've heard LIFT being mentioned, so LIFT is an acronym for Lochside as Families Together, and Lochside is a place in Dumfries that's on that SMID chart of being really highly deprived. I'm Lochside born and bred, and I absolutely love where I come from, and I'm very proud of where I come from and the folk that are in it. And maybe if some of you were to walk through Lochside, you'd get the fright of your life, but they're my people. So I am a local mum. I had my first baby when I was 16 and I was a young mum. I'm actually getting really mortified, my cheeks are on fire. So I just wanted Lochside to be a good place for my weans to grow up. So a group of 5 of my friends, we went to McDonald's, and funnily enough it's next week I'll be 8-year-old, Lift is 8-year-old next week. We went to McDonald's, got a cup of tea, put the group together. It was as easy as that. We wanted to start doing litter picks and improving the area that we lived in through the community centre. So we done litter picks and we ended up doing a bit of creative stuff. We were making lanterns, paper lanterns for the big Burn Supper festival where we were going to be walking through the streets. And about 50 folk came together to weave willow and put paper mache together. And we thought, oh my God, this is great. We done a wildlife walk because we are urban and rural. We're like on the countryside. So we get the badgers and foxes and stuff coming in. We've got this big marsh with like 30 different species of birds. And I wanted to show the community, oh my God, this is what we've got on our doorsteps. And then after the big Burn Supper finished, we finished. And then people in the community were like, oh my God, we need to keep continuing this. So we ended up constituted in the February 2017 and Lift became Lochside's Families Together Constituted Group. After 30 years we brought back a local gala, which the last year was in 1987, so we brought that back. 200 folk flocked onto the big green space that we've got and we were like, wow, this is great, let's keep it going. We were all volunteers for 5 years. I'm trying to make it as quick as I can. For 5 years, we all volunteered, not one of us got paid. We didn't ken about funders or anything at all like that. Might see all like the big words that you use in these books and stuff. I'm like, I don't even ken that jargon. So when it comes to writing funding applications, I'm rubbish. I've got to actually hire folk in to use these big words that bring in the money, and yet I do the work. And the work that I am doing with my community is absolutely amazing. And the reason that I can sit here and say that in front of you is because, see, if I was to invite you out to Lochside to know it and get you to speak to the local community folk that are staying there, they would agree and say, we love it. What's happening in this area is phenomenal. So we've got 2 community shops. It's no charity shops, the money goes back into our community. Everything, we try and make everything £1 so it's affordable for absolutely everybody that lives there regardless of their status. Some stuff we have to make obviously a wee bit more expensive, but we work with the local social work department, the local NHS, the midwives. They come to us for the young parents that haven't got money to go and spend £900 on a pram. They get offers for 20 quid, or if the date is a referral, they get for absolutely nothing. And then, so that's my shops. It's called the Community Exchange, you can follow us on Facebook. We then go NHS funding because I run a project which is very close to my heart called NANOS. And it stands for Nature and Nurture Areas. And it's all about the green space in our area. And then the woman that we were talking about, like feeding the communities and stuff like that. So when you were talking, I didn't care if you meant feed as in like, you want to get more money for the stuff you're actually feeding the humans that you live with. So what we've done is we go funding off the NHS and we run our community garden. So what started off as allotments, through a lot of community consultation, and after COVID and the cost of living, it changed. And now what we're doing is we actually, through what we do now, got artists into the cabin space. And this is where the artists are absolutely instrumental in what we're doing now, because we would have planted tatties in a field where the dogs are coming along and peeing over it. I don't care if I can say that in Parliament. But now with the artists, so my vision was like spray paint and hopscotch, and that was creative stuff for Wayne's today. These artists came and went, they blew my mind, because my thinking of artists was like Van Gogh. Ken, like that's what an artist was. See, when I met Alice and Rosie, they blew my mind. So they now started up a workshop for women, young women in our community that came along, and they started building planters, and they use the planters, and all we grow is onions, tatties and carrots, because you can use them 3 main ingredients in soups, stews and casseroles. We've got Dolicious that came along and they started up a group. They grow wheat. That wheat is now used in the cabin to turn into bread and pastries. We have got wild raspberries, wild rhubarb and all that growing. That gets turned into tarts with the pastries that they grow for the wheat. The bread is used for the soup, the stew and the casserole. So there, I feel like Jesus here, I'm feeding the 500. So for me, instead of putting it into the grass, having the artist is what gave me the vision to actually say, we're building planters, they've built a shelter on the side of the cabin, and on that shelter, so names will ken because he didn't come from where I come from. We're in the local paper because we just recently got vandalised, right? So there's these youths that have nothing today, they vandalised the artwork that all these women had been spending time doing sign writing and stuff. We brought in Maya, she's sitting right there, absolutely brilliant. So now, instead of getting these wains into trouble, we're actually providing them with workshops to do graffiti. If you're going to do it, then again drawing on my cabin, let's do something professional, Ken. So I want me a Banksy instead of use your imagination. Do you get what I'm saying? So that's where the artists come in, and that's why they're so fundamental in your communities. And again, I didn't do jargon and I didn't do funding applications, because yesterday I had a meeting with a funder and they said they read my application that a friend of mine had wrote. They would have refused me the money until she actually met me and listened to me talking and says, you need to record that and stick that in a video and send it to the funders, and that way you're going to get money. So if there's any funders in here that can do it like that, just give me your cash. Alright? Thank you.
Okay, anybody want to follow that?
Get a glass of wine.
I think that's where we call a halt. Thanks, actually. Thank you to all our speakers, to Rosie, to Helen, to Maureen, to Kat, and thank you to everybody for being here and making it a great vibe. So thank you, everybody. That's all.